Hello, and welcome to My Week in Baseball. I'm your host, Phil S. Truth Harrison. You're listening to Season 3, Episode number 1. All episodes are available in both video and podcast format at myweekinbaseball.com or subscribe on YouTube at My Week in Baseball. As always, a couple of thank yous. First, to Rose Petal Studios for the artwork and logos created for this show and website. To view more and own your own piece of art, visit rosepetalstudios.com. And second, thanks to Brunjo Productions in Nashville for our intro music. Learn more at brunjo.com. Well, today marks the beginning of our third season of video podcasts. I mark the beginning of a podcast season when we start to talk about the next baseball season, that being the upcoming 2024 season in MLB. So today we've got plenty of both new and old school topics to cover, including Ohtani's signing with the Dodgers. Yes, everyone's talked about it, and so will I. Recent signings by the Detroit Tigers of starting pitchers Jack Flaherty and Kenta Maeda, along with a familiar face in relief, Andrew Chafin. We'll also talk a bit about automated balls and strikes and a book review of Singles and Smiles, the story of baseball's last 400 hitter and PCL star, Artie Wilson. Of course, we'll also have a trivia teaser and a timely limerick along the way. So let's get right to it. We'll start with the trivia. Let's see if you can answer this one. There are only 3 players in baseball who did all of these things: bat 300 for the career, amass 3,000 hits, and hit 500 home runs. Can you name them? I'll have the answer later in the broadcast. Okay, next up, let's talk about Shohei Ohtani. Now, just before the signing, there were still several teams considered to be in contention for his services as a free agent. One of those was the Toronto Blue Jays, who was certainly in the running. Now, a plane was heading from Southern California to Toronto, and fans were abuzz with the possibility of it being Shohei himself about to announce his signing with the Blue Jays. But alas, it was another well-known personality and investor from the show Shark Tank, Robert Herjavec. Not a ball player at all, though he did later post a photo of himself in a Toronto uniform as a joke. So Ohtani agreed to an unbelievable contract with the Dodgers in many ways, not just the dollar amounts, but the dollar amounts are completely staggering. I will say, coming into this, my expectations were, yes, 500 million plus, I think, over a long period of time, probably a 10-year period of time. And that was pretty common thinking. But I expected it to be structured differently. I expected it to be something along the lines of, let's take him as a hitter and then add incentives for what he might do for us as a pitcher. If you pitch so many innings, or maybe if you become a defender, you move into the outfield and stop pitching, maybe we'll give you bonuses for so many games played at a position, something like that. But it's not like that at all. It's $700 million across 10 years, an average of $70 million a year. This is completely mind-boggling. It's nowhere close to any of the other huge contracts, even Aaron Judge and Bryce Harper and some of the other big signings. It's just head and shoulders above everything that has ever happened. So that sounds like a lot, right? And it is. But it's a very interesting signing because one of the key reasons for going to the Dodgers is that Shohei Ohtani wants to win. He's been on the California Angels, 6 seasons? They've never done very well. And they've been maybe almost 500, but never quite, never made the playoffs with him on the team. So he really wants to win. And he knows that if the Dodgers pay him $70 million a year, and the normal season, it's going to really impact the other players they can put around him on the field. Granted, they've got a terrific team right now, but he doesn't want that. He wants the Dodgers to go out and sign whoever they think can help bring this team together, a team that will be continual contenders, division title winners, World Series participants, and predictably World Series winners. So how does this contract work? Ohtani is going to take just $2 million a year in salary over those 10 years. $2 million. I mean, that's nothing. That's less than, like a left-hander relief specialist makes now. Half of what those guys make. So it's really almost nothing right now. And then he's going to take $68 million a year starting in year 11 through year 20. So it's really, even though it's a 10-year playing contract, it's a 20-year financial commitment. So that's one of the unusual things. He's not taking much now. Now you could say, wow, how can he afford to do that? Well, obviously $2 million is a lot to begin with, but he is making somewhere estimated in the neighborhood of $50 million a year in endorsements. He doesn't even need to be paid to play baseball. $50 million in endorsements. By my understanding, the next closest player is Mike Trout, former teammate Mike Trout, who's making more like $5 million a year in endorsements. So he can really do financially whatever he wants. The other interesting thing about this contract, it doesn't have any official opt-out. So it's not like Eduardo Rodriguez was on the Tigers, where you can opt out after a couple of seasons if he's doing especially well or the Dodgers aren't. But it does have that's not exactly a non-financial opt-out. It's not a traditional opt-out. So the way his opt-out works, even though they're saying the contract doesn't have an opt-out, it actually has two opt-outs. So if either the controlling owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers leaves, or if the president of their baseball operations, Andrew Friedman, departs, then Ohtani can leave after that season. I think the idea being, if one of those guys leaves, they may not have the same commitment to spending and winning. In that case, he may want to try his hand again on the free agent market. So I don't really know if this is exactly a 10-year deal, and I'm not quite sure how that's structured, from years 11 to 20 is going to work if he doesn't end up staying with the Dodgers 10. I'm going to say if he stays with the Dodgers 5, then that's going to extend 5 into the future. That will be my guess. It's certainly possible one of those two executive, one of the either owner or executive could leave. They're at ages in their, I think, middle 50s to even early 60s or something, where either or both of them might choose to retire or do something else before that 10 years is up. So we'll see what happens. I've tended to like the Dodgers because I've not liked the Yankees, and they were one team, at least for me growing up, they were one team that could beat the Yankees. They do feel now like the Yankees of the West, and I really like Ohtani, but gosh, I'm afraid they're going to end up with this really stacked team, and it may be too much so. We'll have to see what happens, but good news for Ohtani. That's quite an incredible contract. Oh, and one other thing I should mention, Ohtani with his $700 million signing is making more money across those 10 years. Really, it's 20, but across that time period, he's making more money than the entire American League Central of all salaries combined made last year, 2023. More money than the entire American League Central. I gotta love it. Next, the Tigers sign pitching. We're going to talk just a little bit about what the Tigers have done. So they finished this past season, 2023, a little bit below 500. What were they? I think 78 and 84. I'm not actually looking this up. I'm doing that from memory. It's about 6 games or so under 500. And remarkably finished in second place in a horribly weak American League Central. So what have they done since then? Well, They lost two pitchers. They lost Eduardo Rodriguez, who did opt out and ended up signing with the Arizona Diamondbacks, a good contract for him. And they also lost Michael Lorenzen, who they traded actually at the trade deadline back in July to the Phillies. So one of the reasons they did so well last season, surprisingly well, winning in the upper 70s, is that Eduardo Rodriguez chose to exercise his no trade clause and refused to trade to the Dodgers at the trade deadline. And so he pitched for the Tigers the rest of the year and was pretty good. And I think that's part of the reason they did at least as well as expected. I think probably a little better than expected. But this year they now have two new signings. They have Kenta Maeda and they have Jack Flaherty. Those are the two new signings. So what do those guys look like? Let's take a quick look at Kenta Maeda. I think he really is the better of the two, but he is older. Kenta Maeda is, according to baseballreference.com, he would be going into his age 36 season next year for 2024. Up to this point, through 2023, he has a career earned run average of 3.92. Decent one-loss record for that ERA, 65 wins, 49 losses. Not too bad. Fielding independent pitching of 3.74, a little lower than his career average. That's the number of runs expected to be given up on the things that a pitcher can control. So it doesn't count balls put into play. His career WHIP is a 1.14, which is good. And his strikeout to walk rate, I think this is a key reason for getting him. His strikeout to walk rate is tremendous. 3.8 to 1, 3.8 strikeouts for every walk. In his career, he struck out just short of 10 batters per 9 innings and walked just over 2.5. So really terrific at controlling the strike zone. Not the kind of guy, though, you expect to be the team leader. I think that's going to be Tarik Skubal as the number one. Maeda is probably the number 2 pitcher for the Tigers, and he's okay. He's on the older side. I'm not sure what to expect of him. I really don't think he'll be quite as good as Eduardo Rodriguez, but this will be his second season after Tommy John. He missed 2022 for Tommy John. Last year, he pitched in just 21 games and at a 4.23 ERA. So kind of so-so. It's actually 2% better than league average last year, believe it or not. And for his career, he's 5% better than league average on the earned run side. So yeah, not a bad signing. Let's look at Jack Flaherty. Jack Flaherty has spent most of his career on the Cardinals, really up until this last season's trade deadline. And he was stupendous in 2019, but that's a few seasons back now. In 2019, he was 11-8 with a 2.75 ERA, a 0.96 WHIP, which is superb. Led the league in the fewest hits per 9 innings at just over 6, and came in 4th for the Cy Young Award. So really terrific in 2019. And of course, if he can get anywhere close to that for the Tigers, well, then they'll have a bargain on their hands. That was it, $14 million for 1 year. I cannot believe the prices, and you probably can't either. The money they're paying for guys who they're kind of reclamation projects. They're like number 3 or 4 starters, and they're paying this kind of money. I mean, it's possible he doesn't even make the team. I think it's possible. I guess they must think he will at that price. Anyhow, for his career, he's got a 3.75 ERA, and he is just 27 this last season. So going into 2024, he would be 28. So he still has some room to grow. I believe the Tigers think that their pitching coaches and staff can turn it around and make him a viable pitcher again. So if the Tigers happen to be in contention, which is feasible, I'm not going to say I expect it, but it's feasible given the weakness of the division, he could stay around. Or if they feel like they're not in contention for the division, he's the kind of guy they could trade going into next year if he can turn it around. He has 10.1 strikeouts per nine over his career, 3.4 walks. So he's more of a just under 3-1 strikeout to walk. So not quite as good as Kenta Maeda, but pretty good career-wise. So, how do I feel about these guys? I feel like I don't know that they're quite as good as the people that the Tigers had last year. I'm going to say, Maeda's probably close to Eduardo Rodriguez, but not quite. And, do I think that Jack Flaherty is going to be as good as Michael Lorenzen was? Lorenzen was probably a career year for him last year. So, probably not. So I guess I think right now that pitching is still a tick below last year. It's maybe close. I do think the hitting's a little better. We talked in the last episode of Mark Canha being added as a hitter, and he would take Miguel Cabrera's place. So he's quite a bit better than Cabrera had been those last several seasons. So I think the hitting's a tick better. I think the pitching is at best about the same. So at the moment, I'm still thinking they're 500-ish. I mean, they could finish about the same as last year, a few games below 500, and maybe only 75 wins. Maybe they could be a couple wins over, but it's hard to imagine them right now being better than about 82 wins or so. I think that would be a good season. We'll see. We'll see what some of the rookies do. That remains to be seen. The last signing I just wanted to mention is that the Tigers did re-sign reliever Andrew Chafin, a left-handed reliever who was quite good for them 2 seasons ago and actually opted out of his contract to go and play for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And he was good again for about half the year. Some things came up in his personal life. I think from reading what I've read, that could have been a factor. He didn't do so well later in the year. I think he's going to be back, though. He's from Ohio. His family lives there. It's just a few hour drive from Detroit. I think he's going to like being in the Motor City again. So I like that signing a lot. And they're going to pair him with another lefty, Tyler Holton, who you might not know much about. Tyler Holton, though, was pretty sure he was a rookie this past season. He was terrific. One of the best around, very unheralded. So I do like the Tigers bullpen going into 2024. Next up, one last Tigers note, and this time it's congratulations to Jim Leyland. So Jim Leyland was recently elected to the Hall of Fame as a manager. He did win a World Series with the Florida Marlins, and he was twice in the series with the Tigers, even though they didn't pull it out. And they did win 4 division championships in a row under his tutelage. I think he was terrific with players. Everybody seems to have liked him. He seemed to know just what to say to motivate people. He knew if someone needed a pat on the back. He knew if someone needed a kick to get themselves going. He seemed to have a real connection with the players, what was going on in their lives and what they needed to be motivated for a given game. And I think that is really important. There was one quote, though, that I just wanted to share. I get this quote from The Athletic, and in past episodes, I've urged you to subscribe. So here's how Leyland tells the story of the day the Tigers signed him way back in 1964. And I just love this quote. So supposedly a scout comes to the family's door, and Leyland's father answers the door. And the Tiger scout says, oh, Mr. Leyland, we would like to sign your son for $1,000. And the father, Mr. Leyland, says, sir, I'm afraid we just don't have that kind of money. I love that kind of thing. And also just a trivia thing, Leyland goes on to be a coach for the Tigers earlier in his career, and he is the first coach that Kirk Gibson works with down in Florida in the A League, Rookie League, when he's just getting started right out of college. Dave Dombrowski hired Leyland both as the manager in Florida and then later in Detroit. But I love that quote, the supposed signing of Leyland. And congratulations for getting to the Hall of Fame. Next up, something to honk about. And today I want to talk about the automated strike zone. You've heard about this. It has been tried in the minors. It won't be coming to the majors yet, but I do think it's only 1 or 2 seasons away. Something is coming. I am thinking it's going to be 2025, but something's coming soon. Anyway, it's been tried in the minors, and it definitely needs some work. The robo strike zone up to this point has been kind of what's called a one-size-fits-all strike zone, which really means that it's a standard strike zone. It goes from, and I don't have the dimensions in front of me, but it's yay wide and yay tall and sits in a particular place on the plate, probably drawn by lasers or some way to recognize the point of the strike zone. But the thing is, right now, up to this point, it does not adjust for a batter's height. It's all the same. So if you're 6'3", there's your strike zone. If you're 5'9", it's still the same strike zone. So I don't know how like Ricky Henderson would respond to this, who got down in that famous crouch, which really shrunk his strike zone. So one of the things they are working on that I believe they're going to be trying in the minors this next season is a way to, I guess, personalize, to customize the strike zone. And the idea is that it will be 2 baseballs above the midpoint of the batter's hip. So that is going to be where that's the top of the strike zone, and it'll be adjusted from there. Something like that. Seems like they're going to have to adjust the bottom of the strike zone too, because it's not always the same height, right? There's a problem if the strike zone is always the same height. So they're working on ways to tweak it to adjust to the batter, and that's got to happen. The other thing I wonder about is the 3-dimensionality, and I haven't read this yet, but the 3-dimensionality of a real strike zone versus, if you're watching this on like MLB.com or even on your TV, a lot of times they like draw the strike zone. It's a 2-dimensional thing right at the front of the plate, right? But the plate's 3-dimensional. It goes back kind of in a cube. It's got a little, angle at the back, but let's just say it's a cube shape, or, it's taller than a cube. It's a rectangular cube. Well, what happens if the ball, does it have to cross the plate right in the front? Can it sneak in and cross the plate somewhere else in the cube? Or what if it starts out in the front and then scoots out in the cube? To me, those are unanswered questions about how that works. And maybe if any of you listening are umpires, you can clarify that a little bit. But to me, there's more to it than just the height of the batter. I think we also have got to be considering that 3-dimensional piece of it. And where does the ball need to hit inside that plate to be a true strike? Anyway, so our limerick today, and we do this every episode, this is our baseball limerick. Today, it is a tribute to balls and strikes. So here we go. The umpire calls it a strike, but the robot says, not tonight, for the ball missed the box that the lasers concoct for each batter based on their height. So now a book review. This book is called Singles and Smiles, How Artie Wilson Broke Baseball's Color Barrier. And it's by author Galen H. White. So I am going to kind of summarize for you a review that I'm writing that I expect to post as a separate blog post in its entirety. But it is a good book, especially if you like the Pacific Coast League of the late 1940s and into the 1950s. Artie Wilson was a terrific terrific ball player. He was a consummate singles hitter. He was the kind of hit it where they ain't kind of player. He had a high batting average, speed, a lot of stolen bases, but he seldom walked. He considered it his job to hit the ball if it were thrown anywhere close to the plate. So he would either foul the ball off, or he would hit a single. He would also hit doubles, of course, the occasional home run, but he was really a singles hitter, hit it where they ain't. He was the last player to hit 400, black or white, and he did so in the Negro Leagues in 1948 for the Birmingham Black Barons when he batted .433 with a whopping .500 on base percentage. He couldn't keep him off the bases. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention that he's a slick fielding shortstop. Maybe I'll get to that part in a minute. He led the Pacific Coast League in 1950, batting .348. He also led in stolen bases with 47, runs with 168. Could he really score that many runs? Holy cow. And 264 hits. He was on base all the time, helping the Oakland Oaks of the Pacific Coast League to the league championship. And he was also the runner-up in the batting title in the PCL at least a couple of more times. It's funny because the stats aren't that easy to find. I remember reading about them in the book, and then I didn't take notes during the book, which I wish I had now, because later it's actually hard to find some of the stats. But Artie Wilson, a terrific hitter and a great defender, primarily at shortstop and second base. He does play second base in part of his career. He generally hit to the opposite field, which was unique because he is a left-handed hitter. And so he would be a lefty and he'd poke the ball between third and short or just over the heads of the infielders on a line drive to left field. And when teams reversed shifted him, he learned to pull the ball beyond first base and pop it into right field. So like Ted Williams, he could hit into the shift and get hits, but he didn't have to hit into the shift. He was an expert batsman, Artie Wilson, fouling off pitches, as I mentioned, sometimes more than a dozen, with the pitcher eventually throwing him a ball he could hit or possibly walking him. His intent was always to get on base quite often, and indeed that is what he did. He was also terrific on defense, a very demanding position, mostly shortstop, also second, as I mentioned. And in the majors, he even briefly played third on more of a cup of coffee. He didn't get a real shot in the majors. Part of that had to do with the number of black players that were agreed to on a given team. It wasn't a rule, but he was the first black player to play on several Pacific Coast League teams, including the Oakland Oaks and I believe the Tacoma Rainiers. He also played for a while on the Portland Beavers. And one thing that I found interesting is that when he reports to the Oakland Oaks, some of the players leave. They refuse to play with him. And it is Billy Martin, who you will all know from his days playing for the Yankees and then later as a manager. It was Billy Martin, the second baseman of the Oakland Oaks, who said, I'll be his roommate. And they partnered on the Keystone combo. So Martin at second, Artie Wilson at short, and they roomed together. I thought that was really interesting. A couple of unique items about Artie Wilson are that he did have an injury while working and playing for a company team in Alabama. And before he joined the Birmingham Black Barons of the Negro Leagues, it was an industrial accident and he lost the end of his thumb. So he had to grip the ball in an unusual way and it caused all of his throws to sink. Still an excellent defender, though, an all-star caliber player. The second thing that I thought was interesting is Artie Wilson had a really strong sense of self-worth and knowing his value as a player. And he actually refuses contracts that aren't right for him. He's offered to go to the majors at one point and doesn't want to play in the majors because he's actually going to get a pay cut to play in the major leagues. Anyway, I really admired that about him. He was a fan favorite. He was always smiling. He was always dressed immaculately. He was willing to sign autographs and actually talk to the kids as people. And I'm going to say one other thing. Artie Wilson is also the answer to a trivia question. And this is just one I'm going to give you the question and the answer right away. But what player was sent to the minors so the New York Giants could make room for Willie Mays? Well, of course, it's Artie Wilson. And it's not because he couldn't play. It's because, as I mentioned earlier, the Giants already had 4 black players, and that was the unofficial quota. Overall, I very much enjoyed the book. I'm going to caution you, though, as a reader, because the story does sometimes ramble and can be a little bit out of sequence. And to me, at least, sometimes veers off topic a little bit. And I had a little trouble finding the thread, even though I found the whole book interesting. Still, though, if you liked Artie Wilson, and what's not to like, or if you're a fan of the Pacific Coast League, it is a must read for you. Again, the book is Singles and Smiles, How Artie Wilson Broke Baseball's Color Barrier by Galen H. White. And lastly, we're going to have the answer to today's trivia question. There are only 3 players in the history of baseball to do all of these things: bat 300 for the career, amass 3,000 hits, and hit 500 home runs. Can you name them? You know, I'd be happy if you got 1 or 2 of them right. Some of you probably will. One of them is Hank Aaron. 305 career average, 3,771 hits, 755 home runs. Another one, Willie Mays, hit 301, 3,293 hits, 660 home runs. And the third one might not be as obvious, but it's much more recent. Former Tiger, just retired, Miguel Cabrera. 306 career hitter, the highest of that group of 3, 3,174 hits, 511 home runs. So those are the kind of traditional statistics, right? When you look at, I'll just say 2 advanced statistics, OPS plus, that's on base plus slugging, how much above or below you are average. Average is 100. Miguel Cabrera was 140. That's 40% above league average. Willie Mays and Hank Aaron are both 155, 55% better than average for their career. Wow. The next stat, the last one I'll talk about, is wins above replacement WAR. Miguel Cabrera in 21 years, 67, which was surprisingly low to me. And I feel like I want to look more into that. I know he tailed off the last 6 or 7 seasons of his career. Last past year, he had negative WAR, and that actually had to hurt somewhat. But still, his was 67 for a career. In 2 seasons more, Willie Mays had a WAR of 156, and Hank Aaron also 23 seasons, 2 seasons more than Cabrera, WAR of 143. So Willie Mays the top in wins above replacement. Mays and Aaron both tied at OPS plus of 155. So Miguel Cabrera quite a bit below them in both wins above replacement and OPS plus. Now, part of that might have to do with the fact that Cabrera mostly played first base. He did play a little bit of third. I don't think defense was ever considered his strong suit. Mays, of course, was terrific. Aaron was very good too. I think that defense, and I know that defense is part of wins above replacement, that could also be a factor in those rankings. But those are the 3 players who have done it. 300 average, 3,000 hits, 500 home runs, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, and Miguel Cabrera. So that's all for today, my friends. Join us next time, because honestly, what can be better than talking baseball? As always, I'm your host, Phil S. Truth Harrison. We'll see you next time on My Week in Baseball.